right, so thank you for joining me, Professor Stanton. So we're going to talk about this big nationwide issue of book banning. It's been all over the news. And recently you spoke at an ACLU of Rhode Island event in Rhode Island about book bans. And you and a couple of other authors and some intellectuals on the topic read some banned books out. So how was that event for you, just first and foremost?
It was great. It was part of an annual event called Banned Books Week, where people commemorate the growing number of books, important work that is being banned. And so it was a way to kind of highlight that to an audience that is supportive of these books and opposed to the bans. So you're preaching to the choir with these groups, but it's good to share and really understand what it is that's being banned. I mean, you might hear a book title, you might hear, oh, it's because it's LGBTQ, or something involving race, or the two most common topics. But to actually hear the actual words. And it's interesting, when I was asked to participate, and I participated in this event before, I said to the ACLU director, I said, do you want me to read a part from the book that is considered obscene or objectionable, or just another part of the book to show that it's more than just that? And she said, whatever. And the point is that there's, a book is a lot of different things. It's ideas, it's expression. And, what some people might find objectionable is important to someone else. And every voice should be heard, and those who find it objectionable should have an intelligent conversation about it and not just try to stifle it.
Absolutely.
Which is what they do.
And is this event just unique to Rhode Island, or is it a sort of national event?
It's a national event. The ACLU chapters across the country hold it. And they've become more common because, unfortunately, there are a lot more books that are being banned today. And for the most whimsical reasons. I just read a story yesterday that there's an author whose last name is Gay, G-A-Y, and her book was pulled from the shelf just on the name alone. Wow. I don't even know what the book's about, and I wonder if the person who objects knows either.
Wow. So just the name alone, and then, wow, you see, it's a wide-reaching with that don't say gay policy. But you read, at the event, the book Between the World and Me by
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, yes. So why did you choose that book specifically to read?
Well, I read a story in the Washington Post a few weeks ago, and it was about a white high school teacher in South Carolina who taught that book as part of her AP English class because she likes to challenge her students with ideas and issues that don't get put before the students a lot. And so Between the World and Me is a book that Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote. He's a Black author who was one of the pioneers of the idea that there should be reparations to African Americans today for the wrongs of slavery and the economic 8-ball that it put people behind over generations. So he wrote this book, Between the World and Me, as an open letter to his then 15-year-old son, who had become very upset after a grand jury failed to bring charges against the killer of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, a white police officer shooting a Black youth and killing him. So he wrote this book, and he talked about how Black bodies are, something that America is built on. And he talked about the endemic racism. And so this teacher in South Carolina taught this book to her class. 2 of the students complained about it to a member of the school board who was in a group called Moms for Liberty, which is one of the leading book banning groups. And they wrote emails to this school board member saying, we're really concerned about this book. It makes me feel guilty to be a Caucasian, and it's uncomfortable. And so this school teacher got suspended, and she was ordered to stop teaching the book. And when she returned from her suspension, there was a coordinated move with 5 other teachers, including the head of her department, walked into the classroom with her, collected all the students' copies of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book.
Oh, wow.
And took it. So I was struck by that. And this woman felt really betrayed because these were her own students, and now she felt there was no trust, and what could she say or do? And so the story was kind of chronicling her ordeal. She became a big controversy before the school board. There were public meetings, calls for her to be, fired. Ta-Nehisi Coates himself came to one of the school board meetings and had dinner with her beforehand, to show his support. And so I wanted to call attention to that, and, kind of both that book had been banned and the important message about race that was being stifled. And I think the other problem with a lot of the books that are banned, which are invariably about Black Americans or LGBTQ Americans, is that you are stifling these voices and keeping, a Black child or a Black adult or a gay youth or a gay adult from being able to see themselves represented, because these books are being taken away from them or not being taught in schools. And I think that's a dangerous thing. I think it gives too much power to people who are very reactionary.
Yeah.
And so that's why I highlighted that book.
That's a very interesting topic, very interesting story. But, you mentioned teaching certain topics to youth. I was looking through yesterday and I saw the stat that said the daily time spent among American adults, people like myself and other students here on the campus, was just 15 minutes in 2022. So with that being the case, with everything in the modern world that just takes our attention away from reading,
sure,
why should young people in particular care about the issue of book banning?
Well, because it's really about representation in our society and addressing systemic racism,
right,
inequality, intolerance towards, people whose genders may differ from, traditional genders, quote unquote. And these people are not being represented. And it's a form of persecution. It's a form of hate and racism. And it also, it stokes, hatred and violence in some cases, towards people that should never happen. One of the other issues you see related to the book bannings is drag queen story hours at libraries are getting protested and threatened and boycotted. And so again, it's like, who are public libraries for? Is it just for the white, majority who, call the shots and are intolerant of other views and other ways of life?
Yeah.
So I think that's why it's important. And of course, the irony is a lot of people say, well, one way you can assure that, a young person's going to read a book is to ban it, because then it becomes kind of, well, what are they banning here? Or who are they to tell me what I can't read?
Right.
And it realizes you have a right. And, along with that right comes an obligation, I think, for young people to get involved and take a stand and care about what's going on in their society, because it's their world that they're going to inherit. Your generation is going to inherit.
Absolutely.
And hopefully it'll be a better one.
Hopefully. But, when we think about the issue of book bannings, we think of these primarily red states, Texas, Florida, which is primarily ground zero for the book bannings that have been going on. But even here in Connecticut, we've had moves to ban certain books. You brought up Moms for Liberty. I've read yesterday about moves down in Fairfield County where certain books are being banned in certain libraries, and how that's an increase in recent years. What normally gets said in this topic is we're trying to stop wokeness. And it sounds so cliche to say that. But beyond just stopping wokeness, which some people who advocate for book bannings would say, what should the average person know as to what is the driving force behind this nationwide effort to ban certain books?
To me, it's become a political wedge issue for the right to try to drum up votes, stoke ungrounded fears,
right,
and win elections. And it's become the new wedge issue. The Republicans were somewhat discredited, in the last few election cycles. They lost Congress, then they lost the presidency. They didn't want to admit they lost the presidency. They did regain the House. But it's become a political issue to capitalize and get votes. And, before that, we saw the issue of same-sex marriage was the big wedge issue that they would use to try to drum up votes. And then that kind of overcame a lot of obstacles, was affirmed by the Supreme Court, and is the law of the land. And so they've moved on to this issue. And this group, Moms for Liberty, I think there are stories about, raising questions of who funds them. And I think it's very cynical, because I think that the people pulling the strings behind the scenes, I don't think they really feel that way or care about these issues, but they use it to manipulate people and to win elections. I mean, you saw the governor of Virginia, Youngkin, who's now being touted as a potential presidential candidate. He was elected governor partly on a platform about, Moms for Liberty and, restoring integrity to schools and getting rid of some of these hateful books, as they call them. So that's where I think it's coming from. And you're right, it's not just in the red states. I mean, there's people raising objections everywhere, blue states. And that doesn't mean they have the same weight in the blue states. I mean, I know there are communities around here where people, parents have gone in, complained about a book, tried to have it banned, and the library says no, because we have a little more of a, sane political climate around here when it comes to that issue. We're not like Florida, which has passed laws. You can't teach critical race theory, which basically speaks to, systemic racism and inequality. And it's documented. And by the way, it's not actually being taught the way they say it is. It's not being taught at all in elementary, middle, or high schools. It's a college thing. But it becomes this umbrella that a lot of the people objecting don't really even know what it is. They call it, black racism, or, it's just ridiculous. Or they accuse anybody that supports LGBTQ people of being groomers. There's a book called Gender Queer that's, I think, the most banned book. It's a graphic novel, a comic, about someone coming to grips with their sexual identity. And it's very realistic about what a lot of, kids go through. And this book has been attacked and pilloried. And when the ACLU put out on social media that I was going to be at this event, I started getting comments about, how this is wrong. And somebody sent me a photo of the cover of Gender Queer and equated it to when they were a child, Playboy magazine was banned from the local library. And this should be banned too, because it's inappropriate sexual behavior. And that's not at all what the book is about.
Right. You said you received emails or tweets.
Well, they tweeted it on social media. In response to the tweet publicizing the event at the library, someone posted a picture of the cover of Gender Queer and basically equated it to Playboy magazine, and it shouldn't be read in schools or libraries. And this is just inappropriate sexual behavior that's being depicted in these books. And a lot of times it's not. And even if it is, so what? I mean, there are, ways to express it. It doesn't mean you're letting a second grader read it, but to hear them, you think that's what's going on.
But I feel like a thing that a lot of people don't understand is that this gets to the very heart of the First Amendment.
Yes.
You can't ban publications, and publications are forms of expression which are categorized under free speech. So how do this issue with book bans conflict with the First Amendment, in your opinion?
Oh, it totally conflicts with the First Amendment. And the hypocrisy is that some of these people will also promote hate speech, demonizing gay people or black people, and with erroneous information that's going to incite violence potentially. And then if they get silenced on social media, they cry censorship and they scream First Amendment rights. But then when, someone tries to read a book about a child deciding, his or her sexual identity, it suddenly becomes, we can't have that. And, forget about the First Amendment. They only use it when it's convenient for them.
So this is like weaponization of like the very first constitutional right.
It's exactly weaponization of it. That's a good way to put it.
Wow. So where we go from here is like the final question I have, because even you mentioned earlier this decay in trust. You know, we can't teach certain topics to make our society a better place. It's not just a political issue or constitutional, it's a societal problem that we're seeing now, you know, where we can't teach certain topics in our schools to our children, the next generation, so we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. So where do we go to repair trust, and how do we go about solving this issue, in your opinion?
Well, I look to your generation and the younger generation. I'm hoping that they're growing up in a more tolerant and diverse world. I know that not everyone is,
right,
but I would encourage, when you come to college, hopefully you look around you and you see more people who are different than you did where you grew up. And hopefully that melting pot will carry over, and there will be less discomfort, because when you don't know someone else, you can suspect the worst, or people can spin, the evil stereotypes. But when you actually know people as human beings, hopefully you can transcend this, and hopefully a generation from now, people can look back and say, what was all that fuss about? Just as, I'm not saying that same-sex marriage is out of the woods, but it's much more accepted today than it was 10 years ago.
Yes.
And legal too in a lot more places.
All right. Well, Professor Stanton, thank you very much.
Thank you, Donato. My pleasure.
It was great. Thank you.
Yeah, keep up the good work.